Hello there and welcome back to Laurence Plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers, where you join me on our latest planet. This is the spectacularly horticultural planet of Foliax, where there are a load of different types of tree, all of which we can then start trying to gather resources from. And you can see along here we have a lot of types of tree. Let's start off by having a quick run through the different types and see what we've got. So at the bottom here we've got the Arbor Primigenia, which is apparently an ancient tree, and that produces wood, which is a very useful resource. You've seen that in lots of places, and you can imagine how we're going to be using that. Then we have the Arboreal, which apparently can be turned into bauxite, so we get these orange pods out of it, and they're turned into bauxite apparently. Moving up a little bit further, we've got the Arbor Ferrea, which, as the name implies, produces a certain amount of iron. The Arbor Cuprea, which is the same sort of idea but for copper. Arbor Calamina, which produces zinc. Arbor Stenalis for tin. Arbor Plumbalis for lead. Arbor Petrolii for bitumen. Arbor Potentium for uranium. Arbor Marmorea for calcite. Arbor Durissima for tungsten. Arbor Igneus for obsidian. Arbor Fulminis for holmium. Arbor Lithiosus for lithium. Arbor Florissicus for fluorite. Arbor Pergamentum for an unknown substance, which is a very, very rainbowy. We've got this weird type of bark coming off it that's kind of rainbow. We'll investigate that more later. Arbor Lapidia for stone. Arbor Carbonea for coal. There's a gap here, which is interesting. I wonder if there's supposed to be something in here. We do have seeds being filtered out over here, so apparently this is the Arbor Prometheus, and I think we may be going to be unlocking that one a little bit later on. Then we've got the Arbor Arcano Nexus, which produces a weird cube thing. I hope that's not related to cubium. Arbor Xenofructus. This one produces Yamako, so we're going to be able to do some vaguely Glebian recipes over here, along with the Arbor Gelatinosa, which produces the jelly nuts, again another Glebian one. And then we have Arbor Sulvifera, which produces brim fruit. And I think that might be, yes, that is indeed the last one. So we've got a lot of different types of tree along here, and they fall into a number of main categories. Okay, we've got normal trees at the bottom. Then we've got these sort of boom puff style ones along here that seem to generally produce the metals. Then we've got these sort of corally ones that produce, I say they're metals. The corally ones also do produce some metallic things as well. And then we've got a few sort of weird plants, another couple of the boom puffy ones, then some sort of willowy type ones up here, and then some very alien Glebian ones here, and then back to sort of coral type ones at the top. So there's quite a lot of different art style going on here, and they're all very colourful, and that's quite nice. It makes the planet look very spectacular and pretty. And if we zoom out as well, then on map view we have many different colours showing up along here, and you can see from here which are the ones that we're using the most of, I think, because they're the ones where the trees are getting pulled up, or is it these are the ones where we have a shortage of seeds? It's kind of hard to tell, but we have an enormous number of resources coming from all these, and they're all different sort of seed pods or fruit types, and every time one of these machines runs, well, it'll take in one of the appropriate types of seed, and then it'll produce a load of the pods or the bark or whatever the output is, and then also some spoilage as well. So we're getting out a range of different things from it. And so because of that, we then need to do a little bit of sorting over here, where we're pulling the seeds out and passing them back round, and then the pods and the spoilage can be dumped out, and we've got this sort of massive chain of belts pouring down the factory here, all the way down the side of the growing area. The farm, should we say, or the plantation. And these are taking all of those resources down into the main part of the factory. The problem with this is that a lot of these will decay. So you can see here, the seeds have a decay time of 10 minutes, which isn't very long, so there's a little bit of a concern with those. Then the pods have a decay time of 3 hours. That's a lot longer. Check my maths if you don't believe me. And so we've got a lot longer to get those down into the factory and start dealing with them. But we will also then have the spoilage and that we need to deal with. And we also need to have a certain amount of churn going on here in order to keep the products flowing through. One of the other things that struck us as being interesting about this system is that when you grow a tree, well, it takes a seed to grow a tree, as you'd kind of expect, but there's only a 75% chance of getting the seed back when you pull the tree up. So it is actually a lossy process, and so you do need an input of seeds from somewhere else, and that is added to by the fact that the seeds go off after 10 minutes. So you can see over here, with these ones only have about a minute left on them. There's no chance we're going to plant all of these before they spoil. So those are going to turn into spoilage. They'll be stuck into one of the stacks down here, and we're going to need to get rid of those before we can start planting any more tin. So there is always that worry that we're going to run out of seeds, but as I say, we do have a system to hopefully mitigate that. Setting up all of this growing area was basically the first big job we started running with when we landed on this planet. And we split it up as you do, so Sophia came up with the design for the little plantation things over here with the agricultural towers, making sure that the seeds could be put in, the resources could be taken back out, and everything should work properly over here. I did a load of copy and pasting of that, but I think Sophia also did quite a lot of that as well. Mike was busy splitting up the seeds as they came up here, so as you can see we've got a belt along here that brings in a selection of seeds, and this is a little bit spoilery for later on because this is how we're getting around the 75% chance of getting your seed back thing. And then Mike went through here and put in all of the different filters along here to make sure all the different types of seeds are being brought out, and therefore we're going to be able to grow all the different types of plants along here. And that was a fairly big job because there are a lot of different types of seeds, and all of these had to then be set up with a splitter to pull the seeds out, and then with a splitter over here that had to be programmed to pull the appropriate seeds out from there. And then we all pitched in to make sure we getting all of these belts running back down into the main part of the factory, carrying all the different types of seeds down there and making sure we didn't get any sort of serious confusion. When we initially designed this system, we had a disposal belt here, that's this one, that was intended to take away anything that was pulled up by mistake from these areas. So if there are any trees growing in these plantation areas, or if there was anything else that just got pulled up, sort of that we didn't really want, that didn't belong here, that could get dumped onto this belt. But now we've got everything sort of sorted out and cleaned up and tidied, we know that we're okay with that. We shouldn't get anything out on these belts other than the things that we actually want, namely the specific resource from that tree, the seeds from it, and spoilage. And so the seeds go out here, the spoilage and the resource go down here, and then that's tidied up further down. One thing I feel I should mention in passing is that we've actually come to this planet at the wrong time. Foliax is really supposed to be a starter planet, so ideally if we're starting from scratch, then we do Lignumis for the sort of starter moon thing, and then we drop down to Foliax, so we'd arrive there without any of the advanced technology we've got at the moment. Unfortunately, Foliax was not ready as a planet mod, when we started the run, so we ended up going Lignumis to Norvis instead of to Foliax, and so since then we've been out to quite a few other planets. Foliax is in fact our 11th planet, or planetoid I should say, because there are a couple of moons in there, and so we have a lot of extra toys at this point. The most obvious of those, and perhaps the most egregious, is that we have the agricultural towers from Gleba, and there is actually supposed to be a specific type of agricultural tower for this planet, and that is the arcane agricultural tower, which is a Foliax one, and that uses those weird cubes I was talking about earlier as the fuel for it, so it takes those in and it burns them, and it's a fetching blue colour as well. So that means that we should be requiring a second feed of stuff to be brought in here to keep these things powered. Not entirely unlike the agricultural towers we were using over on Lignumis when we first got started. These are burner agricultural towers, so we need to send in a feed of peat in this case, as well as the seeds in order for these things to run. So you can see it's got some fuel, it's got its input, and then it's got its outputs, which it's currently trying to get rid of. The towers over on Foliax should have been vaguely similar, in that they should require a fuel supply to be brought into them. But because we dropped in here with Glebian towers, which just require a supply of electricity, and we've got a quantity of solar panels, which were placed in initially by me and then expanded by Tristan and then expanded further by Mark, because you always need more power. Because we had all of that, we've been using the standard Gleban agricultural towers from vanilla, and that has apparently, I've been informed, thrown the balance of the planet off a little bit. There are some other things as well that I should touch on a bit later on, but there's a lot of, in general, this planet, we've gone in with rather better technology than we should have. And so I think one of the things I would quite like to do at some point is spend some time playing through this planet as it's supposed to be, and see how different it feels when you go in with no technology and just the sort of and use it as a starter planet. I think there are going to be a lot of differences, and I think that's going to be very, very interesting. So keep an eye out for a video where I do that. And so, we've got all these seed pods and bark extracts and spiny things and other bits and pieces that we're pulling out of the trees. They're all flowing down the bus down here, as you've seen. And then Tristan had me put in a sortomatron at the bottom, and this was from back when we had the disposal belt that was bringing in quite a lot of miscellaneous, so we didn't know quite what was going to be on there. And so this is intended to split everything out and make sure things are a little bit tidier. So along here you can see we've got all these splitters where we're bringing in a resource and perhaps some other noise as well, like spoilage, and then we're splitting out the actual resource onto the lower belt along here, and then the spoilage or anything else that shouldn't be there can then be passed up along this row of splitters, along here, along here, along here, and then be dumped out. We can pull out the spoilage here to be taken away for future spoilage purposes, or we can just keep filtering it through, and if there's anything that doesn't get sorted properly, perhaps because the jelly nut production has brought in some wood, for example, then that can be brought round this belt around the top and then fed back onto the sort of disposal and reinsertion belt at the bottom, and it'll go through and we'll filter through all of that stuff once again. In theory, we shouldn't have anything coming round on this belt anymore because, as I said earlier, we've cleaned all this out. So this is now just an overly elaborate way to remove all the spoilage. And as it's doing that, it actually works really quite well because you've always got full throughput from any input to any output of a belt. So if this one is running, we can always take all of the purple things from here and put them out onto this belt down here, even if there's any spoilage coming in along here that then needs to be passed up the other way through there. So the split splitter has the capacity for both belts to be running solidly. The only time it can jam up is if you've got multiple belts dropping off spoilage at the same time, and our consumption rate seems to be quite low, especially at the moment, because I think the factory has gone to sleep because we're in between streams at the moment, and so we don't have an enormous amount of resource pouring through here. Therefore, the system is more than capable of keeping up. You can see a load of spoilage going through it now, so all the splitters are running, and it's just getting passed through and then dropped out at the top here. We did have a few problems with this system jamming up during the stream, but that was all because we had things coming down the output, the sort of the miscellaneous chute that shouldn't have been. So, for example, imagine if we had some of these dark purple seed pods coming in along here, then they'd come along here, they'd rattle up all the way through here because they wouldn't match any of the splitters. Then they get to here, and they try and get out, but they wouldn't be able to because this belt is full and currently not flowing. So then they sort of jam up all the splitters along here, and then if any spoilage came through or if anything else was trying to run, that would at that point you could start to jam the system up a bit, and we did have a few problems with that. But we have now managed to get all of those sorted out, and things are just working quite nicely. So this system here is, as I say, largely there to take the spoilage out. But as you'll remember, all of these things also spoil, well, except for stone and wood and cubes. So there is the risk that at some point these will spoil further down the belt, and that is certainly quite likely to happen, but it's going to happen in relatively small quantities and only to things that we're not really using up very quickly. So we're not too worried about that, and we'll deal with it when it happens. Each one of these resources then comes in along a belt like this, and we have to then do some processing on them. And here is a nice example. This machine is taking in the petrolei coral, which we saw being harvested earlier, and is turning it into bitumen bars and lots of spoilage. And so this again is a thing that might spoil, so I've taken Mike's standard design of putting in a loop system here, because to be honest it is actually better than the system I was producing, but don't tell him I said so. And then on the loop we've got a splitter over here that's keeping in the coral pieces and then dumping out any spoilage that can be taken over here and then dumped onto a belt to be taken away and disposed of. We then have the similar thing on the output here, where the spoilage is put onto the first belt to be taken away and again disposed of, and then the rods of bitumen in this case are then being put out onto the other belt. This one should actually have one inserter dropping onto the near side, the other dropping onto the far side. So if we do that, we can get the system running. You can see how it works. We're using a foundry here in order to do this processing because you can. And so we're able to chuck in lots and lots of the bitumen coral and turn it into the bitumen bars. That's flowing away nicely. And then if we follow this belt back up again, we'll see that this one is now running nicely. And there you go. You can see the stuff being pulled through and the spoilage being pulled out there. And if we continue to follow the belt all the way back up again, then we'll see it all being pulled out of the agricultural towers over here, more or less as you'd expect. And so we've got the further away tower running because it is able to produce enough stuff to easily fill the one disposal belt that it's going into. And it's got an inserter on both sides, so we are getting the coral out onto both sides of the belt from this one. So this one is basically dead at the moment and not doing anything. Everything inside it is eventually going to decay and go off, and then we'll just go, oh well. The downside of this is that this one is going to be grabbing all of the seeds as they come through in an attempt to keep its supply of seeds up to maximum. So there's a risk of running out of seeds over here. In fact, we are down to only 10 of them. I sort of feel that we should have both of these belts running in the same direction, so the machine that's doing all of the growing is also the one that's getting all of the seeds, but that's going to be rather tricky to fit in over here without doing massive amounts of rebuilding. So I won't suggest that too loudly. But anyway, yes, you can see that it is running over here, and I do think that we aren't going to end up in a problem situation here, because if this runs to the point where this machine runs out of seeds because they're all going into this one, then eventually this one will unload all of its coral, and then this one will start unloading coral, and therefore will start growing stuff again, and we'll get enough throughput, maybe, that we'll get enough seeds coming through. And if this one isn't capable of keeping up with the throughput, then we should get enough seeds coming through to keep them both running. So I think it should be a sort of a self-regulating system. I've just suddenly put a load of extra load on this, and it's going, oh dear, and trying to catch up and keep up. And it's doing a reasonably good job, as you can tell by the fact that this belt is still full. Anyway, back down here to where it's actually being processed. There's quite a lot of filling up to be done along here, but we're able to. But the machine is running happily, and so this is working quite nicely. And then we're outputting that onto a belt up here, which is part of the bus. And as you can see, Mark has gone through and he's labelled all of the individual belts along here because there's so many things that look very, very similar. Can you tell which is aluminium and which is calcite out of these two? I think I can, but then I've been beating my head against this for a little while. Can you tell what the difference between these two seed pods are? One of them is iron. I think it might be this one is iron, and this one might be tin, but I'm really not sure. There's a lot of stuff like that, and as we go along down here, and we'll have more and more machines doing basically exactly the same recipe, we get more and more different types of metals along here, and they all look kind of similar. They are different colours, and I'm sure with a bit of thought we could probably work them out. But if I said to you, which one of these is the holmium? Well, I wouldn't be sure. It's the pink one over here. Okay, so the point is, it's difficult to tell which one's which at a glance. So we've got labels in to make it a little bit easier. So yes, all of the different resources, they're taken into a foundry and then unloaded onto the belt. Here's another one that should have one dropping onto the far side as well, like that. Now, this is another one of those places where we shouldn't really be able to be using foundries here. We're only able to use foundries on this planet because we went to Vulcanus before we went out to Foliax, and that, I believe, is supposed to be an upgrade you get much, much later on. Instead, every single one of these is supposed to be done in a hybrid processor, and this is another sort of secret burner phase machine because it takes in a fuel type, and then it has a much lower crafting speed. This has a crafting speed of 0.75 compared to the foundry, which has a crafting speed of 4, and also 4 module slots compared to 0 module slots. Not that we're actually using the module slots, but we could be. And so this is something that we're not really supposed to have yet, but because we dropped in with these machines and went, okay, how do we do this? Oh, we use a foundry. Okay, we'll drop those in, that's nice and easy. We've sort of, again, sidestepped some of the progression on this planet. One of the things we haven't been able to sidestep, thankfully, is that there are multiple different recipes for each of these things. So the one we're just looking at there is uranium bar basic, and that takes in 20 potentium barbs and produces 5 uranium bars and some spoilage. Alternatively, eventually we'll unlock the uranium bar, and you'll notice this uses different machines. This is a chemical plant, or a catalytic chemical plant, or an electrochemical plant, which we haven't got yet. This is something we unlocked quite recently, so we've only just been able to start doing this one, so we haven't gone through and upgraded stuff yet. But we are now technically able to start doing uranium processing the slightly better way, which means go in, replace the machine that we're using here, but get a doubling of the amount of output we get. So we'll go from still taking in 20 potentium barbs, but now we produce 10 uranium bars and 10 spoilage, which is obviously twice as good. Then after that we can then go on to uranium bar advanced, which you need to do in a biochamber or in a microculture vat. Interesting. And that is a thing we still haven't researched, but we probably will eventually. Interesting, and that one both takes in bioflux in order to, as part of the recipe, but is also going to require nutrients to power the biochamber, so that's going to be mildly complicated, and then takes in 20 potentium barbs and produces 20 uranium bars, and there's a chance of getting some of your bioflux back and getting a seed back out again, so that's very interesting. It's not going to be enough to really offset the 75% chance of getting your seed back in the first place, but it's enough to make it a little bit more complicated and require us to do a bit more plumbing of our belts in order to keep the system working. Now, given the way we've got this thing set up, where we have our belt over here that will just take any seeds that are produced and pass them back up to the towers, I don't see that being a problem. But it is another thing that we're going to have to handle. Another thing you might notice about this is that nearly all the recipes are exactly the same. So, for example, what's this one? This one is zinc. So here we're taking in the appropriate pod for the zinc and putting it into a foundry, and then we're outputting some zinc bar and some spoilage. I think that's a bit of a shame. I think this would be a little bit more interesting if there were slightly different recipes for all the different resources. It would mean that instead of me producing one of these and then myself and Mike going along just copy pasting bang 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 all the way along here to get every single type of resource out that we wanted, we'd have had to do a little bit of thinking. And I noticed that some of the later stages are a little bit different. So some of them use chemical plants, some of them will output seeds, some use from using biochambers, and so on and so on. But again, I'm assuming that's going to be the same for all of them. And if we take a look at the zinc one as well, then yeah, that is exactly the same. So I think they're all basically going to be exactly the same, and I feel that is a little bit of a shame. However, maybe that's something that could the mod could grow with and come up with some slightly different recipes for them. I'm not saying they all have to be enormously complicated, enormously difficult, and enormously different, but little tweaks here and there just to make them not feel exactly the same would be quite nice. And I don't think just going in and changing the numbers around would be sufficient. So for example, if this one took in 30 Ferrier pods and then produced 8 iron bars or something like that, that's still basically the same. It's still going to be exactly the same setup. You copy and paste it in, it'll work more or less the same. I feel that a little bit more variety would make this a little bit better. There is, however, one recipe that is a little bit different, and that was one of the early ones we did. Over here, making aluminium, you bring in the appropriate pods for that, which is the Argiliaris pod, and then that allows you to make alumina, which is different. This is not the aluminium bars, but that does also produce you your spoilage. And then that's an intermediate ingredient that you then have to put into a furnace of some description in order to get out the aluminium bars. And once again, this is another thing where when you first land on this planet, you shouldn't be able to make electric furnaces. You shouldn't be able to drop these in. You would have to be finding some stone furnaces. And so I think that's not going to be too difficult, because I think there are rocks on this planet that you can beat up in order to get some stone out of them. Yes, here we go. So that'll give you stone and coal, which is enough to get a furnace up and running. But there are a few little bits and pieces there that'll make this a little bit more difficult, a little bit more interesting if you come here as your first planet. And so, as I say, I'm going to do that at some point, and I'm quite looking forward to it. And so we have a little bit of an elephant in the room. I've been talking about how growing the plants over here only has a 75% chance of you getting back the seed that you put in there. And so this is clearly not going to be completely sustainable. You've also probably noticed that there is a belt running up here with a load of different seed types on it. And so you can see that there is going to be something that is going to allow this to work. And yes, you're quite right. If we come down here, we have a little setup down here where we have a little seed gamblometron. And we're pulling in a load of spoilage here and a load of wood that's coming out of the basic tree systems that we saw earlier. And these do seed discovery from either spoilage or wood. And when you run this, you have to feed in 100 spoilage, but when you do, each different type of seed, all 20-something of them, has a 20% chance of being produced. I make that 22 different seeds, and so for every spoilage that goes in, on average we should get 4.5 seeds coming back out again. And that feels about right, seeing what's coming out over here. We fill it up, the machine runs fairly quickly, and then some seeds will get put out onto the belt like that. There we go. So we got 5 this time, aren't we lucky? So the system will continue to run, and no, 4 that time. And this is producing all of the extra seeds we need. And this seems to go quite well. We seem to be quite sustainable on this. These are coming through and then being fed up here, and this seems to be keeping everything running quite nicely. And when he set this up, Tristan has put in a system over here that is monitoring for all of the different types of seeds we can produce, and is then saying, if there's none of those, then we want to run. And that is working, and that is monitoring all of the different belts up here. So if there are any seeds on this belt, and on this one, and on this one, if every single belt has at least one seed on it, then we will stop producing seeds down here. And that is presumably a good thing. It should stop the belt clogging up. However, the belt is still clogging up because there are a few places like here where the seeds, yes, the seeds are coming in, but then because we're not using enough, I think this is probably tungsten. Yes, this is tungsten. All the seeds have spoiled on the belt here. And so that means this belt is full. The system is jammed up. Now, in theory, Sophia has put in a system to deal with that. There is an inserter here that should be taking any spoilage off the underground belt here, off the seed belt, and there's one here that should be taking any spoilage off the seed belt and putting it onto the output belt. However, because we're not actually using any of the tungsten at the moment, this belt is not flowing, so it is completely full. There is no space for these inserters to transfer the spoilage across onto the other belt, and so this is just completely clogged up. If I go down back onto the main bus down here and I find the tungsten, I go, okay, well, we'll extend this belt out a mile or two like this in order to put some load on the tungsten system, so we have to start actually making some. Then the bots will come out and build the belt exactly as you'd expect, and that's going to allow us to start then making some tungsten. So that'll be over here. The tungsten machine has started working. There we go, that's what we like to see. And so we've started pulling in the appropriate... Is this a coral type? No, this one uses bark. So we're pulling in the Durissima bark and then turning it into tungsten, which means if we go back up here again, then you can see up here that the Durissima bark has started to flow once again. And so we're now hopefully able to, yes, there we go, we're now disposing of some of the spoilage that's coming along this belt here. And so that's all been pulled through now, it happened quite quickly. And so we've now allowed all those seeds to flow through. However, we're now jammed again because presumably exactly the same thing has happened a little bit further up. Yes, here we go, with the fluorite processing. So again, we have these problems along here that are where it's just going to jam up. But that said, the system is generally working, so I think we're okay. There is a little bit of a shortage of the seeds coming in for the stone area. However, we have a lot of stone backed up on the belt. It's not going to go off. We're probably going to be generally okay here. I think things are basically fine, but I'm hoping that we're going to start using a bit more of the resources in a sort of steady state, just gradually trickling through them, so we don't have all of these seeds just backed up along the belt like this, because that's a little bit silly. Down here we are starting to use some of those resources. So we're now on the top side of the bus. So underneath the bus is all of the sort of the handling of the tree parts and turning them into metals or whatever, and also generating new seeds. And then above the bus over here we are doing things with some of those resources. So for example, we're bringing in stone over here to turn into stone bricks, some of which is being put into a box so that Sophia can continue to build up these nice floor patterns as walking areas, I suppose. And then as well in this area, Mark has been turning the blue cubes into things, basically. So we've got here, we're making arcane gear wheels out of arcane cubes and apparently aluminium, so we need some of that to be brought in. So that won't have got started until we started making aluminium, but that was a fairly easy... Well, that was one of the first ones we did, apparently. Maybe that was deliberate. Tristan might have specified that he wanted us to start there, or maybe the order you go through the research is encouraged us to start there. I'm not sure. He's also then making machine arms out of the arcane cubes and out of aluminium, and these are an array of colourful arms that are being passed off, presumably to be made into things further off down the bus. Mark has also been producing ammonia, and that's done in a foundry, which seems very, very strange, but apparently it is. That's going into a tank here and then going off down the bus. I don't remember what this is for, but I think we'll find out about that in the next video. And also over here, I set up a little system to start making the Foliax version of the Biolab. And these are similar to the ones from Gleba, but slightly different, because they have a science pack drain that is affected by quality. So at normal quality, they have a drain of 90%, so they're only slightly better than a normal lab. But then as you get the machine up to higher and higher quality, you can get them to be slightly better than the Gleban ones, with a science pack drain of only 45% compared to the 50% of the Gleban ones. You can also increase the speed as well, but I'm sure that the Gleban ones have that as well. The other difference, however, is that they require to be fueled by mixed drinks. These are apparently alcoholic biolabs, so you need to bring in fruit juice, or apparently they can run off bottles as well. Empty bottles can also be burned for their nutrients, which is a rather bizarre idea. Oh, but they only produce 1 joule of satisfaction, whereas the fruit juice produces 4 megajoules of satisfaction. The fruit juice is much more satisfying. And these biolabs are made out of ingredients that come straight out of the trees. So you can see the cubes and the cuprea pod, the potentium barbs and the durissima barks. All of those are coming straight from trees. They don't actually need any processing. And I suspect that's because if we're playing this properly, we would have had to make some labs in order to do some research, in order to learn how to actually process all of the tree parts into the metals. And so you have to be able to make the lab out of stuff you can just get straight out of the trees. But again, that's something we're going to find out another time. And so I think that's a good summary of sort of the first half of what we've achieved so far out on Foliax. There's still quite a lot more to go, as you can see by all of these buildings over here above the bus, which are running merrily. Apparently, well, there's something alerting over here, but in theory they're all running merrily, and there's quite a lot of extra building that we've done that I will talk about in the next video. This one was talking about largely, well, we landed on the planet. Mark got the robots and the landing pad system all up and running, and supplies coming in from the line. We got power set up between most of us. Sophia got the trees growing over here and set up all the sort of the prettiness, and then he was basically our gardener for the stream. Mike brought the seeds to the right places. Tristan oversaw everything and shouted at everyone, telling them what to do and making sure we didn't run out of things that we needed to do. And then Mike and myself went along here turning all the tree parts into useful resources. Oh, and Tristan did the seed sorting as well. So as I say, next time we'll talk about what we're doing with all of these metal bars that we've been making out of strange plants. And that'll be one of those videos that comes out every Thursday and Friday on the channel. So please make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on any of those. We'll be back at 7:30 PM UK time on Monday to carry on playing with this, and no doubt either, well, we may or may not be on Foliax by the time this video comes out. We may have made a little bit more progress by then, but we shall see. And if you'd like to try your hand at the Planetary Pioneers mod pack yourself, you can grab that from the Factorio mod portal. It's called Planetary Pioneers, unsurprisingly. And if you install that, you'll be given all of the planets we're playing with, all of the quality of life mods, and you can then pick and choose over which ones you want to play with, or add in additional ones if you want to make it even more detailed. If you want to play in the same universe as us, use the seed 11111, and mods allowing, you should end up with more or less the same planets. I'll also be streaming on Wednesday as well from 8 PM UK time, and at the moment I'm still finishing off Foundry as of recording this video, but I can see that I'm getting quite close to the end, so unless I have another crisis of running out of steel or something like that, then I may well be playing something completely different by the next Wednesday after you see this video. So please come along to find out what I'm playing then. There's always something going on the channel, so as I say, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.